with those who to make it. Oh, now it's being recorded. So we can share it with those not able to make it today. We will share the link to the recording with everyone who is registered, so you will have access to it later. Please keep the recording in mind as you ask questions. Because this is a public forum and will be shared publicly, we ask that you do not share any identifying information about someone who may be experiencing domestic violence. My name is Azucena Ugarte, and I am the director of the Office of Domestic Violence Strategies. And I'm here today with my coworkers, Liz Bright and Alexandra Lenihan. The Office of Domestic Violence Strategies was created in 2016 by Mayor Kenny with the goal of supporting city departments to improve the way they identify and respond to domestic violence and other forms of gender-based violence. Today, we're hosting this panel to foster awareness about teen dating violence and to share information that we hope will be helpful to adults who have teens in their lives. We have panelists today from Women Against Abuse, Lutheran Settlement House, and Congreso de Latinos Unidos. From Women Against Abuse, we have Liz Coda. Liz is a community educator at Women Against Abuse. As part of the prevention team, she helps design curriculum and leads workshops for middle and high school age students around fostering healthy relationships and teen dating violence. Thank you, Liz, for being with us. From Lutheran Settlement House, we have Devin Weekley. Devin is the teen advocate at Lutheran Settlement House in the bilingual domestic violence program, with a decade of work experience in public health. Devin has a significant understanding of the issues that plague the youth in Philadelphia. Thank you also, Devin, for being here. And from Congreso de Latinos Unidos, we have Kira Bellolio and Lizette Torres-Ortiz. Kira Bellolio has been in victim service advocacy for over 8 years. She has worked in various capacities advocating for victims' rights. Kira has presented in both local and national forums and continues to strive to amplify the voices of survivors. Kira is a trained domestic violence counselor, mediator, facilitator, and conflict coach. Liz Torres-Ortiz was born and raised in Philadelphia to Puerto Rican parents. She has a BSW in social work from Westchester University and has focused her career on youth development, particularly youth in Philadelphia, Chicago, and Camden. Currently in her role at Congreso de Latinos Unidos, she oversees services to youth and parents that have been impacted by DV. Welcome, Kira and Lizette, and thank you to all our panelists today.
Thanks, Azucena. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandra, and I'm going to be moderating the discussion today. I'm at the Office of Domestic Violence Strategies with Azucena and Liz, as she said. I first want to say again, thank you to all of our panelists, Liz, Lizette, Kira, and Devin. We're so excited to have you. Some of our audience members submitted questions before the panel today, and we will be answering those at the end. If you have any questions during the panel, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. So we're not using the chat box, but the Q&A. So go ahead and put them in there. And Liz from our office at ODVS will be monitoring that, and we'll do those at the end. Before we get into the audience questions, we are going to establish a shared vocabulary around teen dating violence, and then we will talk through tips on having conversations with your teens about teen dating violence and healthy relationships. A reminder to myself and to the panelists, we have a live interpreter here today. We're super excited to be interpreting to Spanish. So please remember to speak a little bit slower than you normally would so that the interpretation can happen simultaneously. So let's go ahead and start. We're going to start by getting on the same page about teen dating violence. Our first question goes to Liz Coda. Liz, what is teen dating violence?
Thanks, Alexandra. So when we talk about teen dating violence, we talk about any form of abuse that can happen in dating relationships among teens. And the first thing I want to stress is that the terms violence and abuse, a lot of us assume that is physical. And while there can be a physical component to it, it is not always physical. There can absolutely be emotional, mental, psychological abuse happening as well. And so when we talk about abuse, when we talk about teen dating violence, we're talking about people in a relationship, teens in a relationship, where one teen is trying to exert power and control over the other one. So this can manifest in a variety of ways, and we will certainly talk about some examples. But we see this very commonly with one teen trying to control where the other teen goes and spends their time, trying to control who they hang out with, isolating them from their friends, trying to have an impact on how they spend their time, where they go, telling them what to do. So teen dating violence can look like a variety of things, but it's when one person in a relationship is trying to control the other. And it usually starts with those controlling behaviors in terms of how they spend their time and what they do, and can escalate into potentially physical violence later on as well.
Thanks, Liz. I'm glad you started with giving us examples of different types of dating violence, kind of moving away from just that definition of physical violence. I'm wondering if anyone else has anything you want to add to this basic definition of teen dating violence before we move on. Okay, our next question is going to go to Devin. Why is it important to talk about teen dating violence and healthy relationships with your children?
I really truly believe that it's more important now than more than ever, because lot of dating violence, whether it be for teens or adults. You see it in reality shows, you see it, well, you hear it in music. And I really think that it's important to normalize that those things that are being portrayed and normalized and glorified in songs are not healthy ways to interact in a relationship. Those are abusive behaviors. And the more that the youth know that it's not healthy, the more we can save them from situations that are harmful. Um, as Liz said, it's not always physical. And we always see a lot of people say, well, no, they don't hit me. And it's deeper than hitting you. It starts off with the things that you really can't see. Like she said, the power and control. It starts off with those small things. And then in most cases, the physical abuse is the last part of the abuse, because at this point now they have broken you down mentally, emotionally, and now they are exerting all the power and control from you, and it turns into physical abuse. So I think that it's so important now more than ever because of how society is normalizing a lot of abuse, especially towards teens.
Thank you so much, Devin. Yeah, both highlighting that power and control. And that's a great place to start on an understanding level. Kira, I wondered if you had anything to add.
Yeah, I also want to add that there have been studies that kind of survey both parents and teens, and there's a huge disconnect between, parents feeling like they do talk to their teens about relationships and teens saying it doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen in a way that's actually meaningful, or I'm being heard. So even if you are a parent who's proactive and you feel like you've had those conversations, chances are your teen, may not feel that way. The majority of them actually are saying, no, I've never had that conversation. And also parents sometimes are having those conversations later on to an older teen, when the reality is that teens are having these relationships a lot younger and need to be having those active conversations about healthy relationships younger than you might feel comfortable with. So I think as a parent, getting active, setting out those conversation starters are ways to just kind of gauge where your kid is, but also opening the door to, again, having that conversation about healthy relationships.
Thank you so much, Kira. And Kira, I want to ask you the next question, which is for you, which is a good segue from what you just talked about and knowing when to start those relationships or when to start those conversations. What topics are the most important ones to bring up with your teen in terms of teen dating violence?
So you want to keep your questions pretty open-ended. And I think that if you are having concerns about their specific dating activities and relationships, that you're framing it from a stance of, what do you think is healthy, or what do you think is good? You're focusing in on the behaviors and not the people, because like any kid, as soon as you tell them, hey, this person sucks or this person isn't good in your life, right? They're going to want to explore that, or they may want to challenge that. And I think you're wanting them to establish for themselves what is healthy and what is not healthy. I think the other important conversation that folks need to be having a little bit earlier with their children is those boundaries around their life on the internet, right? Establishing those boundaries, those digital boundaries. And I think most of us probably grew up not understanding that there's such a thing as technological and digital abuse, right? And that it does impact kids, in very real ways, that minimizing it or not validating it just pushes them away. And I think I see parents a lot of times say, just turn it off, right? But that's not the reality of a teen. And I think we need to meet them where they're at and really have conversations around what's a healthy boundary around sharing passwords, what's a healthy boundary around what you share and what you might want also from your partner as well.
Thank you so much, Kira. Oh, did I just see someone unmute? No. So I just want to highlight what you said. What I'm hearing is focusing on behaviors and not necessarily on the person. Establishing healthy boundaries around internet use, social media, sharing passwords, anything around technology, asking open-ended questions, and just continuing and starting earlier, having those conversations earlier.
I also want to add that this is pretty much the same approach that you're going to have whether you suspect that your child is the one in an abusive relationship or acting abusively in their relationship, right? Because you want to, again, promote that positive behavior in relationships and just kind of flipping the script and making sure that they understand, how would you feel if now, you had to give up your passwords, or how would you feel if you had to give up, playing a sport because of your partner, and just kind of having them think through those things, because I think, especially at that age, right, change and it's just a big possibility, right? It's something that can happen really quickly, and having those positive people in your life encouraging those positive behaviors is going to go a long way, rather than penalizing or the negative behaviors as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for adding that. I think it's great to establish those patterns also for both sides of the situation, right? You want to do protective factors for your child if they're on both sides of that teen dating violence relationship. So thank you for bringing that up. I want to give an opportunity for anyone to add any more base knowledge information, and then we're going to move into conversation details. So does anyone want to add anything about just base knowledge of teen dating violence? Is there anything we haven't established that you feel is necessary before we move on?
I just want to point out that this is an issue that is a lot more common than I think a lot of people realize. Current statistics put the estimates at approximately 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men, and 1 in 2 trans or non-binary people will experience abuse in a relationship at some point in their lives. So sometimes I think that it's easy to view domestic violence and teen dating violence as an issue that kind of only affects a small subset of the population, but it's actually pretty prevalent.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Liz. I think it's also really easy to do that as a person who, as a parent or a caretaker for a teen, because you might think, oh, that wouldn't happen to my child. That wouldn't happen in this school. That wouldn't happen in this community. So thank you for bringing that up. It's really important to remember that domestic violence and dating violence is non-discriminatory. It happens to every type of person and age. So, okay, so thank you all for all your answers. I want to move into those details of how to have these conversations. And Kiara brought up some tactics already, open-ended questions and things like that. So we're going to work through the beginning, middle, and end of this conversation. We want people to leave as sort of a playbook if you want to go into a conversation with your team. So let's start at the very beginning. Devin, can you give us some conversation starters? How do you open up the door?
I think a great way to have those awkward conversations is to use teachable moments. I feel like it's less like, oh, wow, you caught me off guard. And like I said in the beginning of the panel, that there's so many great examples you can use for teachable moments. It can be a show, it can be a song, it can be, somebody just walking down the street that you might catch doing something that shows, some abusive behaviors. Using teachable moments often present a great way to pick your youth's brain to see how they feel about that situation that just occurred. And another thing that I would add is to practice discretion. Even if you may see something like at that very moment, you don't want to violate their privacy, because at any age, we all deserve privacy. And I think that also needs to be normalized as well. Young people deserve privacy. So even if you do see something and it like strikes a nerve, like, oh, wow, I didn't like that. Maybe it might be better to address it at a different time instead of just, addressing it head on. Like, even if it's during the time with their partner that you see it, you might want to just wait and say later on, like, hey, I noticed earlier that this and that happened, and is this something that happens all the time? How do you feel about that? But practicing discretion and, respecting their privacy, because like Liz said, you don't want to waste the opportunity by like opening the door for the conversation on a bad note and they just completely shut down. The purpose of talking to them is to get more information, to gain their trust, so that way you can intervene, that you can give that advice that they may not know that they need.
Thank you so much, Devin. It's such a good point that choosing your timing is so important. And like you said, those teachable moments, when you see them on TV, when you hear something in a song, when you see it in the world. So that's the first thing I heard you say, is using those teachable moments. And then secondly, when you see your child or friends or your child and their partner interact in a certain way, maybe when it happens is not the best moment to bring it up. Maybe wait until the car, just the phrases that I heard you say to use almost like as a script are like, I noticed that this happened. How do you feel about that? Or does that happen often? I think you said.
Yeah, those open-ended questions, because it's already hard to talk to anybody about something that they might be aware that it makes them uncomfortable, but they might not be aware that that is a sign of an unhealthy or abusive relationship. So with anybody, it might be hard to even have that conversation. So using those open-ended questions, so that way you can get more information about what it is that you are trying to support them in. And like I said, practicing privacy, because our end goal is to be a support, and we don't want them to shut down and then we lose that. We want to build that trust. We want them to feel like they can trust us. So it might be a little better to just circle back around and say, hey, I saw how you and such had like that explosive conversation earlier. Is that something that happens often? And how does that make you feel when they respond that way? Or when you respond that way, why did you, what made you feel that way?
Awesome, thank you. Does anyone have anything else to add about starting that conversation, opening up the door to this subject?
I think what both Devin and Kira said is really great. I love the teachable moments of highlighting things that they see in the media. I would also say, going to Kira's point of wanting to start these conversations younger, is you can start having conversations with your kids about friendships. So rather than waiting until they're dating someone or they're old enough that you think they might be interested in dating someone, you can talk to them when they're in elementary and middle school about how they interact with their friends, and continuing with the idea of pointing out the behaviors, saying things like, if you notice your child with a friend and something that they do that's good together, highlighting those positive behaviors and those healthy relationship behaviors. And again, kind of like Devin said, asking, about the specific behaviors. Do they act like this often? And you can also ask them, what would you do if a friend made you uncomfortable? What would you do if one of your friends was texting you and DMing you all day and it was kind of annoying and you wanted them to stop? How would you ask them to stop doing that? What would you do if one of your friends seemed really jealous of you? So these behaviors that we know are telltale signs of abuse in dating relationships, focus on how those happen among friends first. And sometimes it's easier for kids to talk about how they feel with their friends versus how they would feel with a romantic partner.
Awesome, thank you. That's a great way to get at that younger age and establishing not just romantic relationship boundaries, but relationship boundaries in general. And I love the examples you gave. What would you do if your friend XYZ? I'm repeating things just so that we can hear it twice. That's why if sometimes it's easier to, use that. Kira, I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, and also to piggyback and focus in on the survivor parent, because I think, a lot of times the parents themselves may have been in an abusive relationship, and survivor parents often, have tried to do everything possible to prevent their kid being impacted. And sometimes it's not until that kid starts their own dating relationships that they've recognized, hey, maybe they saw something or maybe they witnessed something. So I think for the survivor parent, it's being honest, in a way that makes you feel safe as well, but not minimizing and not lying about kind of what has happened. I think it's something that when we speak to kids who have grown up in homes where there have been violence, despite the parents' best efforts, they know what's going on, or they know that their parent is stressed, right? They know that something bad has happened and they may not have the language to, at that moment, to understand what's happening. And now later on in life, they're kind of like, oh, I think this is what was happening. And it might be a good idea for the parent to connect with their own advocate before opening that conversation, so that way they can have this conversation with their teen in a way that is still healthy, right? And isn't, again, kind of putting them back in a space where they're not able to protect and guide their kid. Because I think that's what all the parents, survivor parents, want, right? And how do we add to their toolkit? But also being honest, right? You're a person who may have been hurt. You're a person who may still be hurting. You're a parent who's still maybe navigating safety. And now you may be in a space where you're looping your teen in a little bit more into that. And respecting the fact that they also love their other parent who may have acted abusively. So I think there can be, different components of this. And I just want the parent who's a survivor to really be kind with themselves and be honest and seek support, because it's out there as well.
Thank you so much, Kira. It's just always good to remember that, of course, parents have their own experiences and people are coming from so many different walks, and the baggage that comes along with domestic violence is heavy. So thank you for bringing that up. So I want to move on from these beginning conversations to once you have opened up the door. Lizette, this question is for you. Once, you've asked your first question, maybe it's an open-ended question, or maybe not, but hopefully it's an open-ended question. How can you keep the conversation going? Like if maybe the child is reluctant to engage, or how can you just, rather than it being one question and one answer, how do you keep the conversation open?
It really depends on the level of trust there is with the parent and the teen or the, preteen. I think that they need to have an open relationship where they can be coming from a really authentic place. And that opens up the child's mind, like, oh, mommy's not, she's not mad, she's not this, she's not that. We're just trying to help them learn from their mistakes in life in general, but also being open to receiving the truth back. So the child has to have that confidence to say, I don't feel like this is right. I don't know if this is right. Let me talk to mom. And mom can drop little gems along the way. It doesn't have to take a full-blown conversation, So it's just staying involved with their lives, knowing who their friends are, having the kids come over to the house and you can see the interaction between all of them. Those are just a few things that can help the conversation going, but the child needs to hear that they're safe, that they have someone to talk to, and that they have the power to end whatever it is that's making them uncomfortable. I mean, that's a tough conversation because, if you haven't been a model parent, that can blow back on you. But at the same token, there's so much to be learned by that experience too.
Thanks, Lizette. I appreciate, yes, that it doesn't have to be one conversation, right? Oh, Devin.
I'm sorry, you can finish, Alexandra. I wanted to just piggyback off of what Lizette said. So like Lizette said, knowing the dynamics of the interactions that your child, whatever relationships that they may have, knowing those dynamics, like you said, invite them over to just have a kickback at your house. So that way you can see what it looks like, when there's a change in the relationship. So that way it's not hard to say, I wonder if that's normal. I don't know if that happens all the time. You can gauge yourself if you have a better understanding of what the dynamics of their relationships are, whether it be friends or intimate partners. And there was something else that you said, Lizette. Be ready to get some information that you might not have wanted. Like, it may get uncomfortable. They may mention something about sex that you weren't ready to hear about, but that's all a part of gaining that trust from them. And that's actually a good sign if they say some things that make you uncomfortable, because now that wall is falling down and you're getting another level of trust that they might not have been, comfortable to reveal before, or maybe you already do have that and you're just are building more and more on that trust level. So be ready to get uncomfortable and try not to be judgmental, because the ultimate goal is to gain their trust and to get more insight of the relationship that they are having.
Thank you. I want to ask a follow-up question on that subject. If the parent gets information that maybe they want to feel, like Devin, you just said, judgmental, what are some phrases that could be used to respond, or what's a mindset to respond when your instinct is to be judgmental, but you don't want to do that? What is the alternative?
I would say to try to get a better understanding of what it is that makes you feel like, I want to be judgmental because I feel like that's not right or that's not normal. Maybe saying, well, help me to understand, why is it this way, or why do you feel comfortable react or acting towards each other in that manner. That's one key phrase that I would use. Help me to understand, like break it down to me in a way that I can understand better, because right now that doesn't strike me as something that's appropriate. But I want to gain a better understanding so that way I can, relate to you in that topic or on that subject.
One of the things you can say to them instead of how are you is what happened to you. It totally changed the dynamic of how they feel. And also, I think that, there has to be a starting point to know that this is a serious conversation. It's not to be taken lightly. But as a parent, you have to really take a breath. If you hear something that you definitely didn't want to hear and you feel like you're going to make a face, ask them. They say, you know what? This is kind of heavy for me. Let me take some time and then we'll talk again. So I don't see why just taking a minute to collect yourself before you re-engage in that conversation with your teen is critical.
I would also like to piggyback. Those are the opportunities to invite in support folks that you feel might be, beneficial to this, right? So like Lizette just mentioned, right? It might be a sex question that you just honestly have no idea and say, you know what? Why don't we make a doctor's appointment? Do you feel okay if we ask our doctor about this? Because I don't know. And I think saying I don't know to your teen sometimes feels like a loss of power as a parent, but the reality is you're building trust and you're telling them, I may not know the answers, but I know trusted people who you can go to. And maybe when you have a difficult question, that you don't feel comfortable asking me, now you know that your doctor is a safe place to be able to ask those questions. I encouraged that behavior in the past, so it's going to be safe for you to do those things.
And building off of that, if you do, go see a doctor and say, we're going to talk to the doctor about this. I would say trust your teen to sit in the room with the doctor and have that conversation without you. There may be some things that they want to speak with their doctor about that they just don't feel comfortable speaking about in front of their parent. And by saying, telling them like, I'm going to excuse myself for a minute. I'm going to go wait in the waiting room. I want you to be able to have an honest conversation here. Even though you are not a part of that conversation, it continues to build that trust. And it tells your teen that you do trust them to speak about themselves and to speak openly about what they need with their doctor.
And like Kara said, lean on your community. It's so important to have a community of trusted adults, especially when you are raising a teenager. It's going to come a time where y'all don't speak the same language, and you can literally have somebody else say the same thing you said, and they may receive it in a better manner, because it's like the ear muffs are on when it's like, I'm so tired of hearing my parents talk to me. It's like they're lecturing me. They're always telling me what to do. But then you can have a trusted adult, somebody that's in your community, say some of the same things, and they'll receive it in a better manner. So if it's a time where you feel like it's not clicking, you might have to lean on your community for help.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was so much awesome information. Leaning on your community, opening up to other professionals, doctors, mental health care professionals, keeping that door open so it doesn't need to be one off, remembering that you might experience some discomfort and coming from a place of, can you help me understand? I think I need more information. So having said all of that, the other side of having a conversation that's not being the talker is, of course, being the listener. And I want to, so Liz, this question is for you. What can we learn about the value of listening to your child? Are there specific things you're listening for when they talk about relationships? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. The first thing I would say, and we've touched on this a little bit, is be ready for it to potentially be uncomfortable. Understand that it may be awkward. It may be difficult to have the conversation, to continue to be there and listen. And also understand that this is probably not going to be a one-off conversation. This is probably going to be something that you're going to need to come back to, and letting them know that you're there for future conversations as well. The first thing I would say is believe what they say and validate what they say. I think it is easy to be dismissive with young people sometimes about their experiences, but understand that what your child is telling you is their reality. And as you know, we kind of touched on a little bit at the beginning of like, it's important to listen for things that might be those early warning signs of abuse. So not the like, oh, they hit me, they slap me, they push me, like the obvious ones, but the more subtle ones. So anything that kind of hints that the other person is trying to control them in some way. For some people, that might be, you know, they say like, and sometimes it seems like actually sweet from the outside. You know, they might say like, oh, my partner wants to walk me to every single class. They always want to pick me up from class and walk me to the next one. And while on the surface, that may seem like nice and caring, it is actually showing that maybe this person is trying to keep tabs on your kid and see where they are, or pay attention to who they're talking to or what they're doing. I would also say listen for any cues about like really just any sort of sudden changes in behavior. You know, maybe you have a kid who has traditionally performed well in school and their grades are starting to drop, or they're skipping classes, things like that that are abnormal. Maybe you notice changes in their appetite, changes in their just kind of general demeanor. Maybe they seem more self-conscious than usual. So these things that are kind of these subtle signs that often point to there's someone there who may be trying to control them. And as we said earlier about, you know, thinking about, well, what if my child is the one who is acting abusively? Also look out for those signs of, is my kid doing something that maybe they don't even quite realize right now is controlling? So maybe they are, you know, talking about not liking the thing that their partner was wearing at one point, or trying to tell them they have to dress in a certain way. Maybe they're talking about wanting to spend all of their time with that person and not wanting that their partner to hang out with their friends without them around. Something about wanting to be in constant communication with them, feeling like they need to be talking to that person all of the time. So looking out for these little subtle signs, and there are a lot of them. It's difficult to kind of give an exhaustive list, but any sort of little subtle signs that hint at, oh, is one person in this relationship trying to control the other person?
The other thing that would come into mind, and it's particularly difficult, are the cultural norms of different populations of people. So in Latin America, it's very expected that you serve the man. And so this becomes a learned behavior over generations. They come here, it's a whole different reality. They don't speak the language. Their children do. So they're like running circles around their parents anyway. So it's important for them to keep that sense of identity of where they come from, in addition to learning here, being acclimated here, and understanding what the rules are, understanding what the school system is. I spent many times going with parents to schools to really discuss what is happening with their child, and I would translate. So I just think we can't leave out that cultural piece.
Definitely. Lizette, I agree, keeping that cultural piece. And then also bringing back something Kira said earlier, the culture of being online and what is the culture of the internet is something to keep in mind. And Liz, just a couple things I heard you say: believe your kid, validate your kid, and then listening for those controlling behaviors, either coming from your child's side or coming from the other side in a friendship or in a romantic relationship, like walking to class example, things like that. So it's almost 12:45. I want to do one more thing before we move on to audience questions, and that is the conversation closer. So you've all highlighted this idea that this isn't going to be a one-off conversation. The door needs to stay open. So Kira, can you give us some examples on how to close this conversation, but not really close it?
So when you decide on next steps, make sure that you're deciding them together, that you're not kind of dictating to your kid, this is what you're going to do next, or, I'm demanding this behavior from you, but really engage in them on what they feel comfortable with and ask them, how do you want us to go about this? So, you as a parent have the ability to maybe, change your kid's school or ask for their classes to be changed. But that's not something that you're going to want to do behind their back or without their consent, because that's going to really break down that line of communication. I also think that you're going to ask them not just about the physical safety planning, but the emotional safety planning as well, right? Asking them, who are safe people, who are your friends that you want around the house? Is there anybody that you think would be helpful to have this conversation with, that you want me to make sure that are safe? And that safety planning, it can be a very scary thing, because at that point you're recognizing your kids being impacted, right? And that you're helping to try and keep them safe, and you want to do everything, you want to rescue them, but you need to make sure that they're engaged in that as well. You cannot take them out of this situation. And really what you want to do is long-term impact, right? You want your children to learn that there are positive and healthy behaviors in relationships, because if you take them out of this situation with this person right now and they haven't learned that lesson, unfortunately, they might get in another relationship that's just going to be just as unhealthy. And that's the kind of conversation that you want to have and have lasting impact. Again, leaving that door open that we've all mentioned, right? But engaging them in those next steps. Don't just do it for them.
Thank you so much, Kira. Yeah, that idea of keeping the teen involved. You're making next steps together, deciding everything together, giving them maintaining their power. So thank you. Does anyone have anything to add about this conversation, or about the end of the conversation, before we move into questions that were pre-submitted?
I know it's been, I was just going to say, I know it's been touched on to lean on your community. So I do think that a good way to kind of close out some conversations can be talking about, well, who else is there that you can talk to? Do you have a teacher or a counselor, somebody that is a trusted adult? And, emphasizing that you're there to continue the conversation in the future, but also helping your teen identify other people they can go to as well.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you so much, Liz, for adding that. The community has been highlighted by everyone, I think. So using those resources that are around you. So we are going to move into some questions that were submitted with the registration. And I'm going to ask these questions, and anyone who wants to answer can answer. They're not assigned to any of you. So if you have an answer, just go ahead and unmute. The first question is, if you realize your teen may be in an abusive relationship, what are the first steps to take?
I guess the first steps would be to ask them how they feel about the relationship that they're in. No relationship is the same. Everybody has different things that they are comfortable with occurring in their relationships, but there are definitely some hard clues that the relationship is unhealthy or abusive. But asking them how they feel in their relationship, I think, will be the first step, because you don't want to push your own views and opinions onto your child. If there is a real concern, then I think the best way to address it would be to ask them, because maybe they are feeling that it's unhealthy or it may be abusive, and they don't know how to even start the conversation. So asking them how they feel within their relationship first.
Other thing I would do is just make sure that when you start having those conversations, it's for you to listen and allow them to talk. And as you continue those conversations, the trust grows. So, we got to trust the process. We know this process works. And so, sometimes we get a little bit overwhelmed, but, there's possibility for some good conversation there.
Thanks, Devin and Lizette. The next question is around something, Kira, that you mentioned. You mentioned a safety plan. First, I think to establish just shared vocabulary, can you talk about what is a safety plan with your team?
So a safety plan, really, it's about intentional next steps, right? It's something that ideally you will have thought of beforehand. And, there are templates, there are different things that you can search for. That's an official safety plan, but safety plans can look different depending on the situation. I think as a parent, what you want to be prepared for is not just to cover physical safety planning, but emotional safety planning, again, digital safety planning around just the different access to resources. And you may not be versed having that conversation the first time, right? It might be something that you might have to come back to. And if your kid is coming to you in a point, honestly, that they're in crisis, they're really upset, safety planning in that moment, it's also not beneficial to have it kind of all at once, right? Because they're upset. Right now, they're looking to you just to make sure that emotionally they're going to be able to get to a safe space. And then maybe later on, you might say, hey, I noticed that, your partner picks you up from work all the time. They know, your boss, and they keep like pushing, because some teens work, right? So they might have economic abuse be part of their dynamics as well. So I think safety planning, while it's a big term, it can just be in that moment. What can I do to help you make safe, right? And as a parent, being the person who isn't in crisis, right? You're there to slow things down. You're there to make sure that they know that they are loved, they have support people, and that they are believed. And then you can, again, as a parent, also engage other folks on how to do more formal safety planning. I think this is a great space to push, whether it's your local domestic violence hotline or the national DV hotline. It's an access, it's a resource not just for folks that are in dating, violence relationships, but also for those supporting those in those relationships, and say, how do I help them be safer, and getting those tips.
I would also say I work with a lot of teens, and we share 2 resources with them pretty regularly. The first is an app that is called My Plan. And it's a free app to download where you can create an interactive safety plan. So you can just look in the App Store and search My Plan, or you can go to myplanapp.org. So you could walk through that with your teen, you can share that with them. And then we also share the crisis text line with them. So it's a free, confidential, 24/7 crisis response text line that they can text at any point. And that number is 741-741. So sharing that with them and letting them know that those are resources that are available to them too.
Awesome, thank you both. The next question is, what are some protective factors or preventative measures? And we kind of talked about this in terms of starting that conversation early. Is there anything that's a preventative measure that anyone wants to add?
Just educating them on what healthy and unhealthy relationships look like is a great preventative measure, because at the very least, if they're seeing it and they know the signs of an unhealthy relationship, when they come into those kind of behaviors, they'll recognize it and they'll know, like, this is not, that's not healthy. And practicing at home, even with just like interactions between parents, child, siblings, that's a great way to prevent your child from entering into a relationship that is unhealthy. They'll know what the signs are and how to interact in a healthy manner. So when they do see negative behaviors, it'll be something kind of new to them, like, hey, I'm not used to people talking to me like that. Or, you know, in my family, this is how we do things when we are upset at each other. We don't use that kind of language, or we don't put our hands on each other. Practicing healthy relationships at home, and then also educating them on what the signs of abuse are.
Thanks, Devin. The next question, having requirements or rules when your kid starts dating. Should there be rules set, or, you know, those kinds of things? We got that question from a parent. Should there be dating rules?
Maybe some boundaries wouldn't be a bad thing, but also invite them to come up with, you know, some boundaries together. Like, okay, so you want to start dating. What do you think is a good time to be in the house? Or do you think you should be alone in your room with your partner? Or do you think it's best for you all to be at least in an area where, you know, certain things aren't able to happen? But yes, I do think that some boundaries are healthy in all relationships. So even if you come up with those boundaries together, it should definitely be some boundaries.
I also want to add that when you're framing things from like rules to do and not to do, you yourself as a parent already have like an end picture of what's right and wrong. And that might not be the same thing that your child wants to be at or get at, right? So it's not necessarily open-ended. It really puts you in a position where now they're feeling judged, right? But like, you know, Devin said, inviting them to say boundaries, that allows them to kind of engage in what that end goal is going to be, right? Kids might not want to, you know, ever get married, might want to ever have kids, might not, all these relationship, I think, points that they're going to have to decide for themselves, and respecting them in that.
Thanks, Kara and Devin. That's really helpful. Let's do one more question before we wrap up here. One person asked, a couple people asked about peer pressure, noticing, and this goes back to what all of you have said about noticing those relationships with friends and what's the culture. And can anyone talk a little bit about managing peer pressure in relationships as it pertains to sexual things or anything with the peer pressure?
It's all about how you pour into your child. If you're reassuring them, reinforcing them, having them remember that they are capable, they are able, they are smart, you know, and they shouldn't have to take a low position in any relationship, you know. And so it becomes easier for that conversation to be facilitated, you know, and the teen is going into school like, oh, I know my head is on my shoulders. I know what I'm not going to take and what I'm not, you know. So just by being open, having those conversations, you know, build them up, build their self-esteem up, build their knowledge capacity up. So, you know, that's my 2 cents on that.
I agree with Lizette. It's all about that self-awareness and that confidence. So that way, it doesn't matter if the majority is going one way. If you're confident in yourself and your own morals and values, it does not matter who is not standing with you. Stand in your own truth. Don't let anyone try to make you feel like you're less than because you don't want to go with the majority. But yes, building up their confidence and teaching them that it doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. Do what you are confident in, and stay confident in yourself and your own choices. that's how I would combat peer pressure.
I also think helping your kid find allies. So if you know your kid is experiencing a lot of peer pressure, help them identify who are their friends who can band together with them and help them stand up for what's right. Because we know that going against the grain is hard, and trying to stick up for yourself individually is not an easy thing to do. So really helping them identify who are those good friends of theirs who are going to be on their side and support them.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. I want to be mindful of time. It's 12:59. So I'm going to share my screen with some resources on it, but I just want to say thank you so much to our panelists for being here. This was so helpful, hit so many helpful points. All four of you, thank you so much. There's a couple of resources on here, the Philadelphia Domestic Violence Hotline. Liz also put some resources in the chat. And we also have loveisrespect.com. It's a really helpful resource for teens and for parents. There's a live chat on there. There's also a hotline on there, and a lot of different articles about different populations and different issues in teen relationships. This panel was recorded, so we're hoping that within a couple of days, we can have a link to send out to all our registrants and our panelists. And just want to say thank you so much to the panelists and to all of our audience members. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for engaging in this really important subject.
Thank you all.